Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's see. I've got sorry about that, Tony. There you are.
Okay, I'm here.
I don't know why I've got you as a co-host. I don't know why it keeps putting you in the um
Well, that might be
uh
me
at,
because since
okay.
you had already started, I actually enter as an attendee, so that's my problem, not yours.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay. Well, it's good to see you. How was
Likewise,
how have y'all been?
busy, 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 busy between work and school. Like I'm, just going through this next year. Hopefully, it'll end soon.
Yeah, yeah. How are you doing, Miller?
I'm good, pretty good. Um, yeah, a little busy. We went to the aquarium on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Rob's parents go home on Monday, so we were packing some stuff in.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, but they had a sleepover last night, so we did get a little bit of quiet time.
We went to the Dia de los Muertos event at in Birmingham last night, and it was packed. I
Yeah.
was it started off as several years ago. It was it wasn't well, even then it was packed, but it was small. It was like a side lot down off of First Avenue, and now it's Sloss Furnace, and there was a ton of people there, so it's cool. It's cool.
Extra cool because that place is haunted.
Right.
So y'all didn't do Hallelujah night.
We did not. We did not. Well, and I was traveling Thursday night because it's, back and forth to Huntsville. So,
Trust me, I get it. Huntsville actually part of my new territory too, so I got Huntsville and Memphis now.
oh yeah.
Yeah,
Well, maybe once I'm there, I'll see you occasionally up there. So,
you definitely will.
yeah. We're still we are there is progress being made on our house. That's why I've got boxes behind me because I've been packing up books. So, we are actually in the process of trying to get ourselves ready to move. But um let's see. So, is Rob with us or Rob's not with us today?
Yeah, I thought I saw him go back there. I don't know what's up.
Okay.
I hope he's not having trouble.
All right. He might have gotten lost between. Um,
Whoa.
yeah. So
Why did he
it's
now he's saying, "Can you hear me?" But I don't see his face.
Mm-mm.
He's in Zoom. Oh, does he need to be promoted or something?
Well, let me check.
Is he a participant
Yep, he's a
He
he's an
is.
attendee.
or he's an attendee?
What's
Gotta
up?
promote
What's
him.
up with that?
Weird.
Sound like we got some St. Junior hierarchy going on around here. That's all I'm
Yeah,
getting.
I know. It's like, yeah. Yeah. I tell you what though, I recently I can't what was I doing? Oh, I was doing a small group on it was when I did the psychedelic and mystical experience small group. And so we weren't doing a webinar, we were just doing regular Zoom. And we got Zoom bombed.
Oh
And I
no.
and I was like, how
People are still doing that.
yeah, I mean it was like there's like eight people in there and
Like why?
someone and I was like, golly. So, just FYI, this is why we do webinars because it gives us a little more control over who gets on the screen. Yeah, someone Zoom bombed us. It was they were just in the chat, but it was annoying. So anyway, well, welcome. Glad y'all are here. Thanks for joining us. If you're live streaming on Facebook or YouTube, if you don't mind just clicking like or commenting with where you're watching from, that gives us a way to count you today. Today is All Saints Sunday. So that's a lot of times people, we celebrate Halloween, and people are aware of Halloween, but not as many are aware that we have um, that the reason Halloween's there is for All Hallows Day, which was November 1st, and All Saints Day. That's the day that we remember those who've died in the previous year and um, sort of the great cloud of witnesses around us. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. This is kind of a man, what an inflection point weekend. There's yeah, election week coming up. Lot of tension and anxiety. Thank you all for being with us as we worship today. I'll tell you what, since we actually have several scripture readings today, why don't we do it this way? If Miller, can you be the liturgist?
Sure.
And Tony, can you be voice of the people? And then let's see, Rob, if you don't mind doing the um Jeremiah reading, the Hebrew Bible
Okay.
reading. Um Tony, can you do the New Testament reading, which is Revelation? And then Miller, if you could do the John reading, which is the gospel
Sure.
reading. Does that sound good? All right. I will pull up the liturgy. And whenever you're ready.
Today is November the 3rd. And on this day in 1534, the English Parliament passed an act making Henry VIII the head of the Church of England, formally ending allegiance to the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope. This point in the Protestant Reformation was 16 years after Martin Luther's famous 95 Theses, and although it was prompted by Henry's desire to divorce, the Church of England's theology split from Roman Catholicism in important ways, not least of which was priests' ability to marry. Today is the feast day in the Church of England of Richard Hooker, who died on November 2nd, 1600. He developed his theology to resist Calvinism and Roman Catholicism and emphasized the three-legged stool of scripture, reason, and tradition. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
As beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
draw near and let us break the bread of life.
Today's responsive reading comes from Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants too.
Because God is the one who established it on the seas.
God set it firmly on the waters.
Who can ascend to the Lord's mountain?
Who can stand in his holy sanctuary?
Only the one with clean hands and a pure heart.
The one who hasn't made false promises.
The one who hasn't sworn dishonestly.
That kind of person receives blessings from the Lord and righteousness from the God who saves.
And that's how things are with the generation that seek him, that seek the face of Jacob's God.
Mighty gates, lift up your heads.
Ancient doors rise up high so the glorious King can enter.
Who is this glorious King?
The Lord strong and powerful, the Lord powerful in battle.
Mighty gates, lift up your heads.
Ancient doors rise up high so the glorious King can enter.
Who is this glorious King?
The Lord of heavenly forces, he is the glorious King.
Today's Hebrew Bible reading comes from Jeremiah chapter 31. On this mountain, the Lord of heavenly forces will prepare for all peoples a rich feast, a feast of choice wines, of select foods rich in flavor, of choice wines well refined. He will swallow up on this mountain the veil that is veiling all peoples, the shroud enshrouding all nations. He will swallow up death forever. The Lord God will wipe tears from every face. He will remove his people's disgrace from off the whole earth, for the Lord has spoken. They will say on that day, "Look, this is our God, for whom we have waited, and he has saved us." This is the Lord for whom we have waited. Let's be glad and rejoice in his salvation.
Our New Testament reading comes from Revelations chapters 21, verses 1 through 6. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the former heaven and the former earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. I heard a loud voice from the throne say, "Look, God's dwelling is here with mankind. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. There will be no more mourning or crying or pain. Anyone, for the former things have passed away." Then the one seated on the throne said, "Look, I'm making all things new." He also said, "Write this down, for these are the words, for these words are trustworthy and true." Then he said to me, "All is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end."
Today's gospel reading is John 11:32 through 44. When Mary arrived where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." When Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews who had come with her crying also, he was deeply disturbed and troubled. He asked, "Where have you laid him?" They replied, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to cry. The Jews said, "See how much he loved him?" But some of them said, "He healed the eyes of the man born blind. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying?" Jesus was deeply disturbed again when he came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone covered the entrance. Jesus said, "Remove the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, "Lord, the smell will be awful. He's been dead 4 days." Jesus replied, "Didn't I tell you that if you believe, you will see God's glory?" So they removed the stone. Jesus looked up and said, "Father, thank you for hearing me. I know you always hear me. I say this for the benefit of the crowd standing here, so that they will believe that you sent me." Having said this, Jesus shouted with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his feet bound and his hands tied, and his face covered with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Untie him and let him go." May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
Richard Hooker wrote, "So natural is the union of religion with justice that we may boldly deem there is neither where both are not. For how should they be unfeignedly just, whom religion doth not cause to be such? Or they religious, which are not found such by the proof of their just actions?"
So thank y'all for getting us started with worship today. Again, thanks to those of you who are tuning in on Facebook or YouTube. If you would just click like or comment with where you're watching from, that gives us a way to count you today. We'll go into a time of prayer. I'll get us started. And if you would like to lift up a prayer request, feel free to put it in the comments or the chat. I will try to keep an eye on YouTube. When I did it last time, it got really, my connection just slowed to a crawl. So just a heads up. If someone would keep an eye on
I
Facebook,
got
that would also.
Facebook.
All right. Let's go to God in prayer. Gracious God, on this All Saints' Day, we remember all those who have come before, not just our physical ancestors, but our faith ancestors. We remember people whose names mean much to us. And we also remember those anonymous saints who have shifted the needle in the world towards justice, towards love. We name people before you in our hearts who we miss this year. God, we also recognize there are so many who are unnamed, that We, like they, will eventually be forgotten, and yet our influence will be felt. We ask you to help us be faithful, that to the seventh generation, people may feel the effects of what we do. We lift up to you all those who are struggling, who feel abandoned, who feel cut off from their community or from their ancestors. We lift up to you all those who call out to you, asking if you see. We lift up to you especially those places that are torn by war and conflict. We also lift up to you individuals with their own personal struggles, which they might have difficulty even putting into words. And we lift up to you ourselves and our brokenness, recognizing that we are entrapped and enmeshed in so many layers of sin and systemic injustice. We ask that not only for this week as people vote in the election, but in all things that we do, we may move toward that vision of the kingdom, which is peace and justice. The good things we ask for ourselves, we ask for all beings, not just our relatives, not just human beings, but all your creation. And we lift up to you the concerns of our hearts, and I invite those of you who are listening to name them or put them in the chat or the comments.
For Camille's mother, aunt, and all elders.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Traveling mercies for all those on the road.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those struggling with unemployment and financial pain.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For trans folks thinking about going home for the holidays.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Well, all those who are anxious about the election.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Lee Watson and Joe Arthur.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For poll workers.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gratitude for the Wildlife Rescue Center.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Rob's parents as they travel home.
Lord, hear our prayer. For caregivers, Lord, hear our prayer.
For peace in Gaza and in Ukraine.
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, for all the prayers that we've named and those that remain unnamed, for the prayers of our hearts that we don't even know how to put into words, we give you thanks that you hear and that you answer. And we join with Jesus in the prayer that he taught us to pray. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come, let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So I'm curious, before I start, can y'all hear my washing machine, or is it just loud to me?
That's loud to
Okay.
you.
Okay, good. It started up and I was like, oh my gosh, that's gonna be so annoying. Anyway. Um, so so today's All Saints Sunday. Um, and traditionally this is the day of the Christian year when churches remember those who have died not only in the past year. Frequently there's a service where we light a candle, ring a bell, read out a list of names of those who have died. Excuse me. But also kind of remember the great spiritual family tree that we come from. That this idea that even after you die, you're still a member of the church universal, that there's an invisible church that we can't see that connects all followers of Jesus through all times and all spaces. So basically, the same the same church universal that you're part of, um, Hildegard of Bingen is part of, or St. Paul, or Oscar Romero, or Martin Luther King Jr., or pick a name, a famous name in history. You're part of that same church. And part of the idea of All Saints Sunday is to celebrate the fact that we have such a deep and wide background of faith ancestors. And I'll say that for me, one of the reasons I really like All Saints Sunday, and I do this, I try to bring a piece of this into every Sunday, is that I'm going back through Christian history, right? I mean, the idea, um, unfortunately, among many in American culture, is that there was Jesus, and then there was the early church in Acts, and then there's us. And 2,000 years of history just kind of evaporate. And unfortunately, again, I'm part of this is I'm a nerd. I like teaching history. I like going back and hearing about, different theological controversies and the outcomes and, you know, but the idea is that even with Christians with whom I disagree, there's a big family tree, right? That as much as I don't particularly like John Calvin, he's part of Christian history, right? And as much as I don't particularly um, like conservative evangelical theology, there's a lot of people. Billy Graham is part of that Christian family tree, and teaching that Christian history, I think, is important because I think it helps us see that we didn't invent this stuff, right? It wasn't just laser beamed from God into the brains of human beings, and then people are, you know, some people are really close to the later church. We have the truth, right? That there's this enormous family tree. In fact, there's a wonderful cartoon that you may have seen. It floats around on the internet. If you're at all interested in Christian history memes, a big graph of all the denominations, and it's so many. I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds of denominations. And then there's a little dot way over here, and it says the guy that's teaching this Christian history to students says, and here's where we got it right. Um, I like that because I think part of it is it's meant to keep us humble, right? All Saints Day, in a way, is to remind us that we are one link in a really long chain, or one branch on an enormous tree that includes I have to tell you this story. I talked with a guy who's a friend of mine who's comes from a Muslim background, but unfortunately he got roped into a conversation with uh, an undergraduate religion student from Samford who sat down with him from coffee and was really trying to, put the thumb screws on and talk to him about, conversion and really actually a very pleasant conversation because this is a nice guy that I know. Um, but uh, but he was talking as though there were no Christians in the Middle East, you know? And I just said, this guy probably didn't know that there's Coptic Orthodox and Syrian Orthodox and Ethiopian church. And like there have been Christians in Africa and the Middle East and Asia long before Southern Baptist founded Samford University. So, I think it's to me so enriching to realize that even like I don't want to be culturally appropriating other stuff, but that's part of my faith history, right? By virtue of the fact that I follow Jesus, that's part of my faith history. So I love the way that All Saints, in my mind, expands our notion of what it means to be Christian, because I have to recognize the church in India that has been there long before United Methodists appeared on the scene. I have to recognize all these other different expressions of faith. And I'll also say it's also so there's that expansive piece, and then there's also kind of the narrow piece, which is I think every single one of us knows that our spiritual life, the way we understand our own faith, has been profoundly influenced by an auntie or a grandma or a Sunday school teacher or a pastor that we had. Like this didn't fall in my lap, right? That the practices that we do as Christians, the particular perspective I have. Now, we're all unique, right? And it probably is, as we talk, this is one of the wonderful things I love about kind of the conversational way that we do church is we have different perspectives and we have different opinions, and that's okay, right? But even my opinions and perspective that I think are so unique have been profoundly influenced by other people, you know? And to some degree, the differences we experience are because we've been influenced by particular people. I grew up in a United Methodist church in Huntsville at Home Street United Methodist Church. Not a big church, mid-sized church, 400 or 500 people. Um, and and I had a youth pastor named Eddie Johnson who um when I was a teenager and I was really frustrated with the bureaucracy of church. And I can't remember what exactly it was. There was a committee meeting or something, and they came back with some decision that just really irked me. And I was like, what the heck? These adults are so stupid. And I remember saying to my youth pastor, I said, I feel like we could run the church better than the grown-ups could. And my youth pastor, actually, I think it's, oh, darn, I think I've already packed it, actually. It used to sit right back here. He 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 found a play, and we were going to do a play for a fundraiser, and it was called The First Church of Pete's Garage. I know I've told this story to y'all before, but he cast me as Pete. Okay, and it's this the youth group decides that they're going to go start their own church because they're really sick of the way the adults do things. And of course, what they find is that it has all the same problems that the adult church has. I mean, there's the same bickering over music, like who's going to sing the solo in the choir, and who's fights over the money, how they're going to spend them. I mean, it's and it's funny. I mean, and of course, it's meant to point out the fact that wherever you go, you're still human, right? But Eddie had this idea that the way he was going to educate me about this was to cast me in a play. And I gotta say, I mean, I knew what he was doing. I knew that he was addressing me in this play. But the fact is, he took my concerns so seriously that he did that for the church. Like he took a fundraiser and he took my complaint and my issue so seriously that he took it as a teaching moment. And even though I knew what he was doing, I knew that was an expression of love. I knew that he loved me and he took my questions seriously. Um, that meant a lot to me. That meant a lot to me. And it influenced me. I mean, would I have decided to plant churches? I mean, it's comical. It just it I can't help but laugh. That he took my complaint and he made it part of the church story. And I feel like when I look at the scope of Christian history and the way that some of these things have played out, the way that these theological discussions, theology is not just about some baloney pie in the sky stuff. And even though sometimes I go back and I read theological controversies and I'm like, what were these people smoking? Like, why were they beating each other up over this stupid, stupid issue? Like whether the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father or the Father and the Son. Who cares, right? I mean, oftentimes I feel that way. But I also recognize like at some point, like there was something that was important to a person, and in order to address that, to make that part of the conversation, part of this ongoing discussion is what evolved. Now, I don't like the way it evolved sometimes. I don't like the conflicts, and I don't like I don't like the fact that Calvin decided to burn Michael Servetus instead of like having a conversation and just. But I do think that I think that All Saints Day helps us. I borrow a phrase that Melissa Scott likes to use, helps us right size our understanding of our current moment and our own place in church history. And I can't think honestly, we're here in an election, on an election week, and when I have seen some of the most damage ever done to the church, in the last 6 years, honestly, since I God, what am I saying? 10 years since I started St. Junia, and then we made the shift. We made the shift to doing house church in 2016. Um, and part of the reason I wanted to plant a church was I felt a disturbance in the force. I felt this big shift happening in the church, right? And that massive damage is being done to the church, and I felt like I need to make lifeboats for people, right? Like there's where the ship of the church is sinking. We need lifeboats, and that's really what propelled me into doing an alternative form of ministry, church planting. Um. Anyway, I am part of that communion of saints, part of this Christian history of trying to find new ways forward when crisis looms. Um, I'm excuse me. I think ultimately the hope is for all of us is really the eschatological hope, eschatology, excuse me, meaning end times, but end not like post like apocalypse with zombies and fire and damnation. The end, the end is like the goal, like where we're trying to go, right? The end times is when we reach the goal of a world oriented around love and justice, where people are healed, where there is wholeness instead of this incessant conflict, where punching down doesn't get you anything, um, in a place where people are lifted up. And the idea is that our ancestors, our faith ancestors, biological ancestors, faith ancestors, however you want to think of it, right? The people who came before have been pushing us to get to a better place. And it's the recognition that that's part of our legacy, that we are in the process of pushing toward a better place. So I'm going to stop there and invite you to reflect, respond, or respond to the scriptures, whichever you prefer.
I think it's funny And sometimes I kind of wish there was a version of the Bible that actually had like the real names, because let's just be real, nobody in the Middle East during that time was named Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. And it is the arrogance uh, of white people's Christianity that really just bothers me. Like, and I think I was probably like maybe 11 years old when I realized that nobody at that time was named John. Like, what was Mary's real name? But like, and I hate saying this, but it's true. Like, y'all ancestors been changing history up for a minute, and now we can't even study our own history in a decent way without people being offended.
Hmm.
That's the level of arrogance of Western Christianity that bothers me. When
Hmm.
you are so full of yourself that you can't even be self-reflective to see where, well, did this really happen? I mean, like, there's always that push and pull with the Bible. Like, well, is this like parable, or did this really happen? Like, this really happened? Or is just like something we're trying to make an example about? But those people's names,
Do you,
I feel like they were important.
you feel like hearing her called Miriam instead of Mary, or hearing Johannes instead of, you know,
Why could we not do that? Like,
Cephas? Yeah.
I don't
Hmm.
understand. Like, they weren't that hard. Like,
Hmm.
I just don't understand. But that
Can,
kind of like pushing this false sense of superiority, in which
mm,
like this is our religion, and only people who look like us, should be able to practice it, are really the only Christians, because you gotta look like us, and nobody in the Bible look like y'all.
I, I wonder. I
Nobody.
wonder if have you read? So there's a First Nations translation of the New Testament, and I love the fact that Jesus's name in the First Nations New Testament is Creator sets free. Like that's Jesus's name. Like that's how they translate it, and they translate all the names like that.
I like that.
So yeah, like they just call Peter. I can't remember if they call him Rock, but anyway, it's something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it just
Miller. Oh, go.
I think having that mode of thinking would kind of help these
Mm,
wing evangelical theologians to
mm,
like be a little bit more careful when you decide who's not a Christian by the way that they look or how they
mm.
identify.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Everything we have is if we were to go back to the first
Maybe the
century with
whitewashing has been on and popping for the last 2,000 years.
it would feel yeah it would feel like a very different cultural expression, wouldn't it? Yeah. Go ahead, Miller.
Like just the other day, a friend of ours in the ministry was posting something about um Genesis, like the Adam and Eve story, the apple story. And I mean, which we've talked about and have like definitely dove down and found a number of different interpretations that are possible, you
Hmm.
know. But the assertion was that, well, of course, you have to read it like God was punishing them when he
Mm,
sent them out of the garden and Eve was in the wrong, and say that this story is so many thousands years old.
hmm.
you know People have been telling this story and retelling this story and rewriting this story like for thousands and thousands of years, and how can you possibly put yourself in the mind of those people and say that your perspective is the same as theirs?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the whole Bible is like that, which is why I love stuff where like they actually dig into sort of the historical perspective, like Amy Jill Levine talking about, first and second century Jews, what would this story have meant to them? Because that's what it meant originally,
Hmm.
like
Right.
and I think All Saints, I really like the idea of right sizing in terms of like, no, this is way bigger than what seems obvious to you as an evangelical Christian or whatever in
Hmm.
America in the year 2024.
Yeah. Well, as you were talking about Genesis, one of the things that I love the quotation by Augustine that comes out occasionally when there's some creationism argument, where he says Augustine basically says, people who are arguing for a literal interpretation of Genesis make us look stupid. And this is back in the 400s, Like Augustine said, people who argue for literalistic interpretations of Genesis make Christians look dumb. Please stop. And, 400 years ago, 400 years after Jesus. That's one of the reasons I love going back to Christian history. Is to say, like, yeah.
But if you go back to history, then you can't make it your narrative. Like that's
right.
That's the conundrum in all this. Like if we decide we're not going to tell the history of slavery in America as not the history of Black people, but the history of white people,
right?
Then I can't interpret my own narrative about what I want people to take from that. Like even going back to the Adam and Eve story, like it's the ultimate obfuscating of responsibility. So it's Eve's fault that Adam bowed to peer pressure.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But and then we take that. We take that and we make it a narrative about every woman in the galaxy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that you guys are the bad ones and like you are just like, and I'm like, can we talk? I think the theme of my period of my life at this point is people taking responsibility for their actions. Everything ain't somebody else's fault.
Yeah.
And we take no responsibilities for our actions in this country, in this society, almost on this planet. Like, whose responsibility is it for me to make sure that I do what it's mine. I can't blame Miller for, telling me something, I do it, and I end up getting in trouble. Like, you should have thought of this on your own. And my second point is like, again, this whole Christian literalist and like, we just gonna tell a story to make us feel good. Y'all know I've said this before. I hate going to funerals in which they talk about how grandma's sitting in heaven right now at the hand of God. Well, there are several scriptures that totally contradict that. Grandma is in this box, slowly decaying like everybody else. And I know you want people to feel good, but why lie to them to make them feel good? It's like in the invention of lying. Y'all remember that movie I told you to watch? Like literally, like if we believe this is in the Bible, then why do we go to funerals and then tell this total counter contradictive narrative? And so, like when I think about All Saints Day, it's really better than the story. Like the spirits will probably still be lurking around here because they haven't been let into heaven yet, so it would make more sense, to honor them because they're still kind of floating around or in Sheol or wherever they may be. But if grandma's already gone to heaven, then there's no point in having All Saints Day.
Well, I'm gonna go back. First of all, I think you spot on about the erasure of history, right? I mean, because it plays, whether we're talking about secular history or we're talking about religious history, the erasure of history is a strategy, right? It's a strategy for oppression and domination. When it comes to the afterlife, I want to say I don't hold anything too literally, even if it's, whether it's the Bible, whether it's, that we're waiting for a bodily resurrection or whether there are souls floating off in heaven somewhere. In part because I think the question is about time. And in some sense, if God stands outside of time, or God is even the God of time, then we're already with God. Like I'm already dead and with God in eternity. And I'm just remembering this experience. I mean, that's one way to look at it. Or in a way, I've got one foot in this world and one foot in another world. And I think that's kind of that's really almost the mindset that I want to cultivate in myself, which is like, so in one sense, things have a lot of import. Things are really important, but in another sense, it doesn't matter. It's already decided.
But you don't have that arrogant, superior, like Christian mentality. Like You can't go to the average Southern Baptist church and say what you just said
Right.
without being
Well,
labeled
no,
a heretic and probably being burned at the church. Like you just
no.
can't do that. And my point is that I think we all should be a little bit more malleable, a little bit
Mm,
more, accepting of things that we're not sure of, things that we should believe as our faith column, and things that we
hmm.
just know not to be demonstratively true.
Yeah.
Like the fact that the Earth is 6,000 years old. No,
Hmm.
we know that to be not true. And
Yeah.
so, like, you got to be able to figure out how to reconcile that with your, theological sense. And
Hmm.
the sad part about it is there are so many people who claim to be Christian who just throw that out, like, just do what I say and don't you say anything about it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that didn't work for our kids.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Rob, you've had your hand up for a minute.
I think it's interesting to see the connection between Melissa's comments about right sizing that you were
Hmm.
referring to, Dave, and what Tony is saying about taking responsibility. But to tease this out, I have to go back to what Miller was recounting in relation to, interpreting the Garden of Eden story, right? So the theme that arises in so much of that, interpretation, the word that Miller didn't use is obedience,
Hmm.
right? People do like to focus on obedience. So the story presents that God gave a command, people violated that command for whatever
Hmm.
reason, and therefore they are punished. And, you know, I mean, yeah, for my money, when you consider this is a very, very old story. And like a lot of things in the Bible, I think you have to stop and say, wait a minute, are we actually talking about something that happened, or are we talking about literature, right?
Hmm.
Um, because it's very significant to be talking about literature from thousands of years ago that meant something to people and what they were using it for, why the story was important to them, right? What they learned from it. I mean, we run into this when we talk about Job, right? If you try to make out that Job actually happened because God wanted to win a bet with Satan, your theology is going to spend the
Oh,
rest of your days failing to
yeah.
recover from that mistake,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? You just can't do that.
Hmm.
Anyway, so I think it's interesting that people latch onto this obedience theme, right? So even though I don't really think that's what you have to do with it is the point.
Hmm.
So what's interesting in this connection between right sizing and taking responsibility, I feel like, I mean, so let's talk King James only for a second, right? Folks that get very wrapped around the axle about evidently it was straight from God's mouth to King James, not that King James was on doing the translation. He was the one that said, let's make this translation, please, but whatever. Uh, and so I guess there was no Bible before that. But
Right.
now,
Mm.
because God did God's best thinking in English, um, this is now the Bible that we trust. And so
Yeah.
like I mean it's stupid.
Hmm.
It's stupid. But okay, we're all in on this. We're all in on King James only. So I think this is such a good example of what people want to be obedient to.
Hmm.
They want to be obedient to something that relieves them of any responsibility other than obedience. Okay. So rather than that little dot on the family tree of like, this is where we got it right, what they want is to feel very strongly that they are in that dot,
Hmm.
that dot is huge. It's all that matters. There's not, anything outside that dot is so ridiculous or flawed or broken that it can be ignored. It doesn't matter. Best left unthought of. Don't open your heart to that,
Hmm.
right? And instead be obedient to this experience of, yes, King James only, women are silent in church, men this, and just this whole strong plausibility structure that got built up and got handed down and is asserted to have been just like you said earlier, laser beamed in, right? This
Hmm.
didn't have to develop, nothing changed over time. It's always been right. This is exactly what it is. Just be obedient.
Hmm.
And I think that contrasts really strongly with what Tony is highlighting about taking responsibility. I think
Hmm.
right sizing is actually the path to responsibility because when
Hmm.
all saints is an opportunity to embrace the humility of saying, I don't have the job of getting Christianity right for all time. There's
Right.
no such thing as getting Christianity right for all time. I'm not in very much of time at all. I'm just in a very little piece of it. So, what I have responsibility for is to do a good job with Christianity right now as the person I am, in the place I am, the culture I am, the time I am. I just need to get it right in a very small way. That's the
Yeah.
only contribution I can make, and that's what I have responsibility for.
Hmm.
It's really shocking to me to suddenly notice what a vast difference that is, right?
Hmm.
The humility of embracing a small place in a big complex picture and accepting that I can only get right something very small versus this command of obedience with a capital O that
Yeah.
says nothing has ever changed, nothing evolves, there's been no development, there's no story, there's just timeless dogma, there's just this
Mhm.
catechism. Just commit yourself to this and die happy.
Yeah, no, I think it's a beautiful way to put it. I think you're right. I think it's yeah, right sizing is a way to responsibility. I like the way you put that too. Go ahead, Miller.
Just a brief comment about like perspective before I wanted to read some comments.
Yeah, please.
Um, but like we've been watching this series on Netflix, based on like a book by Graham Hancock, who I know he's a little bit kooky, but like honestly, he asks some very interesting questions, and I think a lot of it is basically perspective on well, the show's called Ancient Apocalypse, so
Mhm. Oh,
it's
there we
kind
go.
of like woo, but all he's really talking about is the possibility that what we would call civilization sort of extends further back than in places that we don't think it did,
Hmm.
you know.
Hmm.
um and stories now, this is like era, like we know about this, we know what happened to these people, but like Easter Island or Rapa Nui, like they had this huge civilization with like a very old written alphabet and like, or some kind of writing system, they don't really
Hmm.
know. And obviously we all know about like the Moai, the big heads on Easter Island that stick up out of the dirt. Like those people were killed, you know mostly all at once, for like literal bird poop, um
Hmm. Hmm.
because they were captured by like pirates or you know people who wanted to go and get fertilizer off of islands, and they wanted slave labor to get it. There's also
Hmm.
linked to a book that I've been reading called The Alchemy of Air, which is about basically like artificial fertilizer and like its origins and how complicated that is. But anyway, the fact that this whole civilization is gone now and nobody can read that writing system anymore,
Hmm.
like what has been lost. This is just
And
one
that and
thing.
that happened in the last 200 years.
Right,
Hmm.
right, it was in the
Hmm.
1900s. you know
Hmm.
and the fact that one time, I mean, look at like the civilizations like wiped out in Africa by like the slave trade and like
Hmm.
countless other places, you know like how can we have to think about those people on All
Here,
Saints Day too?
like here
Hmm.
in the
Well,
US.
yes. Yeah, that's actually something else that Graham Hancock talks about, is like the technologies that we don't even acknowledge as technology because we just sort of killed these people. We don't
Hmm.
know, like the mounds in Ohio or even Alabama, like we don't even know like
Hmm.
what was going on there, you know because we didn't acknowledge the humanity of these people. So I
Hmm.
think like a huge part of All Saints Day is like looking back and acknowledging the humanity of our ancestors, you know,
Right.
their individual importance, you
Sure.
know.
I'm curious. I wonder, we have a few minutes left, but I wondered, like, just to kind of personalize it a little bit. I mean, because I think part of what the day does, I mean, we have a historical reflection, but then we have sort of near history, right? Which is, I mean, I share a story about my youth pastor, how my youth pastor probably influenced the trajectory of my life, whether I, you know, realized it or not. But I'm curious for y'all, like when you think of the person who's influenced your faith or your religion the most, your worldview, who would that be for you? Not to put you on the
Hmm.
spot.
I oh sorry, were you gonna say something?
This is gonna sound like a shameless plug, but for me, it's you.
Oh, but I'll pay you later.
You know, you knew where I was when we met.
Yeah.
And you changed that. I was like, screw church. Like, who needs these folks? Like, they're in self denial about everything that they do because everything
Hmm.
is so hypocritical. And it's okay for me to do it, but it's not okay for you to do it. Like even right now, even our political discourse, we have a man who has 4 kids, about 3 different women, and you're accusing your opponent of sleeping her way to the top. Like,
Hmm.
make that make sense for me.
Hmm.
And the Christians are behind it. Yes, we're still going. No,
Hmm.
no. And I was tired of that when I met you, Dave. I was absolutely sick of it. And
Yeah.
not just them, even with my own people. Like black people are some of the most conservative people on the planet.
Hmm.
All of our weird thoughts about this religion that's not even ours, and somehow or another we want to hold us to a higher standard than everybody else. Like I was done
Mm.
with it. But you changed that. You debunked rumors of scripture, like and made it plain and clean. Like I
Mm.
and so for me, it's you.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot.
I'm just glad you're not dead. And we had to on our side.
You have to light a candle for me yet.
Yeah, come on.
Oh, thank you.
Kind of like what I want to lift up sort of a dichotomy in my own familial spiritual past. Like I think about my mom's parents, my grandma, and I know maybe it's a little cliche to like say, well, my grandma, but
Mm.
like I never saw, I don't know, I never saw my grandma contradict her faith, But at the same time, I also saw her care about intellectual pursuits and literature and, expanding her mind, you know, and art. Like I think she both cared for her Christian community and, because she would like one of her things was she wrote cards to people who weren't doing well or on their birthday or whatever, that was her thing. It was very personal. But she also introduced me to like Agatha Christie and like, a huge hunk of my library is her books, you
Mm.
know? And then I also have to think about my grandfather, her husband, who was in um well he was in World War II and Korea. And because of the things he saw, he did not go to church, you know?
Mhm.
He had questions about like what was dark and awful in the human experience. And I think it's important that I got to see that, you
Yeah.
know? I don't know what he was thinking exactly on the inside of his head, but I do know that like that's why he didn't go to church
Hmm.
because of what he saw in his experiences.
Yeah.
So I think it's also important that I got to see somebody asking questions. I got to see somebody saying, like what is religion in the context of all of this darkness,
Hmm.
and that's really important to me.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I'll just offer very concisely that, as we've lived through increasing, madness
Hmm.
in the church, um, the unfailing signpost for me, because sometimes I don't know, like whether it's imposter syndrome or just like, am I the crazy one? You
Yes.
stop and think. I mean, just because they're all in so much agreement, right? They're all so convinced. And maybe I'm the one who's completely out of it here, but I think of my grandfather, who would just not put up with this nonsense.
Yeah.
Um, no, he would not sign up for any of it. He knew the score. He was an incredibly kind and decent and intelligent, thoughtful, reflective person. And just like I have my mental model of him. Whenever something comes out of somebody's mouth, for a moment I'm thinking, it's like, no, no. Grandpa Davis knows that that is stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. I do think, yeah, I think so much of, when I think about people who've meant something to me, it's like or influence my faith and values, It's that kind of thing. What would such so and so do, or what would they say? And then it's like, okay, that's my North Star, right? Yeah, clearly um that's a red line for me or something. Absolutely. Um, yeah. Well, we're kind of toward the end of our time together. I know we've had some comments. Would someone mind reading a few of the comments? We don't have to read all, just some ones that seem relevant. I want to lift up Chris's actually. Why is it that we have tremendous violence all the way to institutional policy as a reaction to, in some cases, pardon me. Why is it that we have tremendous violence all the way to institutional policy as a reaction to, in some cases, is a difference in a difference in how we do the same thing? Why is it that I got you? Why is it that violence is so easy to choose? Yeah, I think that's a good question.
And I'll tell you
Well,
why from Camille's comment.
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
Camille says,
that
those
last
who are,
sentence is
I know, right? Those who are living and preaching evangelical and Christian nationalism versions of religion will never change their tune since it's what funds them and makes their followers feel powerful. They do not want to let go of a world perspective. It gives them a feeling of safety that critical thinking cannot offer. So
Yeah.
that's why they choose violence,
Hmm.
because the violence makes them feel safe. And
Hmm.
actually
yep.
being logical and actually use your mind, they don't feel safe with that because
Hmm.
it goes against their perspective. It's the ultimate in confirmation bias.
Hmm.
Well, and notice how the fear of disobedience, the fear of hell,
Hmm.
right, is so useful for making people live in that kind of fear, right? So
Hmm.
that because what are they trying to be safe from? They're trying to be safe from damnation,
Yeah.
right? They're trying to be safe from disobedience that cuts them off.
Hmm. Well, and
The stakes are so high.
I want to tag on to that. I think part of that safety is a feeling of group allegiance. And there is in Rene Girard's book, Violence and the Sacred, he talks about, yeah, our group is going to do violence to this sacrificial person as a way of building group cohesion and paradoxically a form of safety by directing the violence either outside toward another or inside toward a sacrificial martyr. Um, yeah, I think you're right. I think part of it is people thinking that violence will make them feel safe, and part of that group cohesion that comes from enacting violence. Would someone read Teresa's comment?
Sure. Because I kind of agree. Um,
Mhm.
probably Madeline L'Engle for me. I was so steeped in a version of Christianity that was highly literal, yet nonsensical and self-contradictory. But my favorite book growing up was A Wrinkle in Time. And those seeds planted at a very young age allowed me to understand there was something else out there.
Yeah, yeah, I
Right.
hear that. Yeah, Madeline Engel and C.S. Lewis for me stoked what I think of as a religious imagination or a spiritual imagination, and in a way that just didn't did get I didn't get that itch scratched anywhere else. Right? It was literature. It was yeah, good stuff. Well, that feels like a good place to wrap up. Why don't we go ahead and turn back to our liturgy for the day? Can y'all see that?
Yes. The glorious choir of the apostles praise thee. The admirable company of the prophets praise thee. The white-robed army of martyrs praise thee. The holy church throughout the world doth acknowledge thee. The Father of infinite majesty, the venerable, true, and only Son, and the Holy Spirit, the Comforter. We beseech thee, therefore, help thy servants, whom thou hast redeemed with thy precious blood. Make them to be numbered with thy saints in glory everlasting. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
Thank you all for being with us today. Thanks also to those of you who joined us via streaming on YouTube and Facebook. Again, if you don't mind just clicking like or leave a comment with where you're watching from to give us a way to count you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream. And if you're on Zoom, you can stick around for